Hey fellow fishing fanatic, are you tired of sitting inside during the winter on those cold days, not catching fish, thinking about catching fish, maybe watching some YouTube like this, but really, you want to get out and catch fish, you just don't know how, or you think that bass don't bite during the winter? Well, I'm here to bust that myth. My name's Wesley Littlefield with YourBassGuy.com. Today I'm going to give you some tips on how to catch bass in the winter. So tip number one is understanding how a bass actually functions, and what I mean by that is how the water temperature actually causes the bass to function. So as we know, bass are cold water species, which means that the water temperature actually regulates their temperature. So the colder the water, the colder the bass will be. The warmer the water, the warmer the bass will be. Well, this also messes with their metabolism. And so the warmer the water, the higher their metabolism, the faster and more they're gonna need to eat. The colder the water, the slower their metabolism, the less that they're gonna need to eat. So obviously during the winter, they don't have to eat nearly as much as they do when they're burning a lot of calories during the summer. But they still have to eat. And that's why we can go and fish for them. So now that we know that bass eat, and honestly, big bass eat during the winter, so this could be the best time to actually catch those bigger bass because they're gonna be the most hungry. Now that we know that, it's time to know where to fish. I think this is the most important thing to know about fishing, period. Whether, it's more important than knowing the right lure, knowing the right colors, all that stuff is knowing where to fish. Because if you're throwing the right lure in the wrong spot, you're still not gonna get a bite because there's no fish in the wrong spot. So knowing where fish hang out in the winter is probably the most important tip I'm gonna tell you. And there's no one size fits all answer. The best I can help you with is understanding that bass are still gonna move from shallow to deep, deep to shallow throughout the winter. Everybody might think that, all the bass move deep during the winter, and that's just not true. Some days they are shallow because the water's warming up, and that shallow water warms up quicker, so they're gonna move up a little bit more, and it's gonna excite the bait fish, and then the bass are gonna eat a little bit more on that warmer days and that warmer water. Or it might get colder and it might push the bass deep, and they might be suspended 15, 20, 30, 40 feet down. So with that said, I can't tell you exactly where the bass are gonna be, but look for transition areas, or look for areas that go from deep water to shallow water fairly quickly. Like a river channel, a creek channel. Main lake points are some of the best, if not the best place to start looking for bass in the wintertime, because you've got that point that extends into the lake and then it hits the river channel, or it just hits a deep spot in the lake really quick, and those bass will be out there on the points where it transitions pretty quickly, depending on what day. They can swim into the shallows or they can go back deep. So look for transition areas. That is where to start in the wintertime. So now that we know where to start, what lures are we gonna throw? Because bass metabolism slow way down, we don't wanna just, be burning a crankbait and burning a spinnerbait all day long. There is a time and place for that. Even during the winter, bass will still hit a crankbait if you're burning it. On some days and some occasions, you can cause them just to get a reaction strike. But most of the time, you're gonna have to be fishing like a blade bait, maybe a lipless crankbait, and you could yo-yo it. You can do a little bit, slowing it down a little bit. Jig is another excellent wintertime bait. It's good any time of the year, but especially during the winter. And jigging spoons, anything that kind of mimics a little bait fish, a wounded bait fish like that, is gonna be good. So now that we know what lures to throw, that brings me into my next point, and that is slowing down. Now, like I mentioned, you can burn a crankbait on some days and get some bites, but that's not always gonna be the case, and more than likely, you're fishing too fast. I know even during the summer, I tend to fish too fast, and it's not that the fish can't catch up to the lure, it's just that that lure doesn't look natural when you're just sitting there just cranking on it the whole entire day. So my recommendation to myself and you is to slow down. Slow your presentation down, slow the technique down, just slow down you will get more bites that way. Now, with that said, I have to have a disclaimer that this is still wintertime fishing and you're not gonna get as many bites as you would during the summer because not as many fish are hungry. So manage your expectations and understand that I'm not gonna go out there and catch 15. You know, I might get 2 or 3 bites and I might catch one of those. That's just winter fishing. It's not, you know, I get 30 bites and I catch 20 fish. It's I get 3 bites and I catch 1 fish. So manage your expectations. Even if you slow down, even if you're fishing in the right spot, just remember that probably not going to catch as many fish in the wintertime. So staying with lure selection, there's 2 schools of thought, and I tend to lean both ways, which is weird, I know, but I think that downsizing your lure during the wintertime is most often the best strategy. So for example, I was fishing here a couple weeks ago and the weather has been cooling off. It was really more like late fall, early winter fishing, but still I had a little bitty jig on and I was actually trying to catch crappie, but I caught more bass than anything, and I just had a little bitty plastic jig on with like a 1/16 ounce or something, a real tiny weight. I was hammering the bass. So downsizing your lure really works during the wintertime. But there's also the other end of the spectrum where guys say, no, you know, keep your lures big and bulky like an umbrella rig, for example. And you know, you want it to really cause a disturbance and look giant and like a giant easy meal. This is because the bass can chase 100 little bitty minnows and try to eat them, or it can chase 1 big fish and eat it and get the same nutritional value out of it, but it's spending way more energy trying to chase those 100 minnows and trying to eat them versus that 1 fish. So there's 2 schools of thought, and I think they're both valid because obviously guys catch fish doing both, but you know, one day it might be I need to downsize my lures, and the next day it might be no, I need to upsize and choose the bigger ones. So with that said, the tip is stay away from the medium-sized lures and go for either small or large. The final tip that I'm going to leave you with today is to keep it simple. Now, I'm not one to try to overcomplicate things anyways. I think life's complicated enough to keep it simple, but especially when winter fishing, there's really not that many lures that will look natural and act natural in cold water. So, you know, simplifying your tackle box and only bringing, you know, 5-6 lures that you really know you'll use helps tremendously. You know, you don't feel so overwhelmed, and understand that, you know, you might have to rotate through all 5 lures a couple times throughout the day, but keeping your tackle box simplified, keeping your fishing strategy simplified is the best way to progressively get better throughout the winter and to catch some giant bass in the wintertime. And speaking of big bass, if you want a big bass lure, that is the umbrella rig during the wintertime. This lure has been banned from professional fishing tournaments, and honestly, I mean, for good reason. But it's not just cast it out there and retrieve and you're gonna catch big bass all the time. There's a few things that you need to know to get started fishing the umbrella rig, and you'll find that video down below me. I'll see you in that one. But I always want you to remember that education is important, but fishing is essential.